You're working across both VC and private equity companies. What are the differences that you've seen, and what can they potentially learn from each other?
Leadership was very different. I think having been at EA, I got used to Californian ways of thinking and doing things, and helped to translate that culture into the UK. I remember having the first presenter coming across, and this was back in EA, someone who I won't mention, but came from Pixar, and the first thing he said to the crowded room of English people was, "Can I have a whoop?" and tumbleweed. Very different.
And then obviously you have a different government in the US that might have taken a slightly different angle on things, and we've got Europe here. What in 2025? What's important?
Right.
Jenny, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. I guess as a starting point, could you just give us a bit of an introduction as to who you are?
Certainly. So I'm Jenny Collins. I'm from Northern Ireland. I moved across and was doing, studying in Manchester. Started my own recruitment business when I came down to London, and then moved into tech recruiting, which I absolutely adored. My family are very technical and entrepreneurial, and so I really found my home at EA Games, and then moved across to Google when it was coming over. It was a startup when I joined, all on beanbags and segways, and really found my feet there, kicking off the intern hiring on the technical side, and then the graduate hiring, and then PhD hiring, and becoming more and more specialist, really traveling the world trying to find the best AI researchers and opening offices across EMEA, really to be able to accommodate them, and down to Africa before I then started looking at investing. I left Google just before the lockdown. I thought I'd be coming back to my office at some stage, but didn't. So COVID meant that I suppose we all hid away in our houses and didn't really know what to do with ourselves. So I got into networking just to pull everybody together, and networked with a lot of people coming out of Google that wanted to start their own business, and tapping a lot of the AI researchers who I'd paid a lot of money to join Google, and wondered whether they might want to do some interesting stuff with their equity that was doing very well at the time. And so put these two things together in demo days, and ran those online. We were very, very good at using what we called Hangouts at the time, VC interviews, etc. But setting up demo days where we'd have about 330 angels, investors, and people that want to learn how to invest, etc. And we'd introduce them to 12 to 16 startup companies, mostly in tech. All of them had some sort of Googler as a founder. And it was really lovely to be able to connect these people and see them go off and be able to build their businesses. And then we got into recruiting for them and building their target operating models and helping them with their pitch decks, etc. And then, of course, once the doors started opening after COVID, I looked around to see what I should be working in, whether it was tech or whether it was investing. And something that brought those two sides together was, I suppose, Mayfair Equity Partners that I moved to be able to really look at building a company again and building teams and looking at how to bring a bit of the Google culture across to a very traditional area of investing. And it got me back into London, which I love the bustle and the noise and the people. So I worked there for a couple of years to really build the team and build the culture. And once I'd put all of that in, I've jumped out and I've been working fractionally as HR, looking at tech companies and looking at the people, the processes that embed the people, and then the performance and how that's reviewed and how compensation can really embed those great behaviours. So that's where I am now.
Super.
Really love building and love working with technical people. And yeah, that's me.
Brilliant. And what's the one sort of common thread that runs through all of those roles?
I suppose it's the people. I love working with people. I was quite I suppose, deflated at home within COVID and really needed to connect. But I also love connecting people to other people. I remember being at conferences, research conferences, and, being able to find a common thread that they would want to talk about. I often didn't know what the algorithms did or what they were researching, but if I could pattern match skills and interests, I'd stand back and see people talk for 10 minutes, and that was a real joy. I think even at university I was doing singles parties to bring people together. And I think just bringing people together and seeing the magic that happens when people join up and join forces, seeing that happen, that's my common thread, I would say.
Yeah, super.
It's really fascinating speaking to you, someone that's been at Google, and you left at a time, I think, when most of us didn't really know about AI. And so you must have had this really fascinating insight as to just generally the development that was going on in the background, all these exciting things that were to come as well.
Absolutely.
I don't know if you can tell us a bit more about that. It would be really exciting to hear.
Absolutely. It was interesting that I suppose when we were in Google, AI was definitely going to be the next thing. And for me, I love the technical side, and so I could see that. And I was going to the conferences and talking to the people, and so I thought everybody thought that. And it was only when I was outside of Google that I realized everybody suddenly thought that AI was the next big thing and was taking off. And this was 10 years after we'd been doing it. But having said that, the AI that we were working on and what we would have called AI was very different. I think the first time I heard that term was at EA Games. And I think we bought Bullfrog, and Peter Molyneux was working on, I think it was one of the AI games, Black and White. And he was working with a little guy called Demis Hassabis, who was a producer on, I think, Theme Park. And they were investigating AI. And I remember asking what it was. And they're saying, it's, just A plus B equals C, etc., and more complexity. And I've always come back to it. And that's specifically, what we've been doing. It just becomes more and more complex. So, if computers can work out patterns that, I suppose, copying what we're doing in nature, if you make it more and more complex and you form these neural networks, you're just adding more and more complexity to show that they can duplicate what's happening in nature in the real world anyway. And that, I suppose, was what was interesting at the start. You wanted to be able to duplicate how someone moved in a game, or, how... I suppose there was first-person shooters, so what was going to happen. You could jump out of the way of things, whether it was, predicting Pong or being able to work out chess was always going to be this next big goal. But it really was more on the theoretical level. They were developing algorithms that could do stuff that we weren't sure how to interpret in the real world, and that was it was more complex, and it was more, I suppose, for the folks that are studying maths and computer science right up to PhD level and beyond, these people would be really, really focused on one algorithm for weeks and weeks and weeks. And it was those building blocks that we now see being applied to so many day-to-day activities and actions, and seem to be able to make our lives a little bit more simple. And I think it's more exciting now. We can actually see the product of all that hard work.
Mm. Are you excited or a bit nervous about people, because you love people, you love tech?
Yes.
And there's this really interesting intersection, right, between the two and what it means for the world and employment. I don't know if that's something that you think on a lot.
I do. And people always ask me, what's going to happen with AI? Isn't it awful? Everyone's going to lose their jobs. I think people tend to be quite polarized in what they say. I'm just fascinated by it. I think it's going to change the way that people work. I think it already has changed the way a lot of people work. I don't think it's going to stop people being needed. I think it's going to mean that we'll do less of the mundane stuff. I can't see it taking over. I haven't seen, I know there's, Jeff Hinton I knew very well, and he's, very keen for a lot of guardrails to be put in place. There's so many different ways of thinking, but I can't see the complexity that they work on for one specific thing jumping to another So I can't imagine that an AI that's supposed to translate languages is suddenly going to be able to do something completely different and suddenly suck power out of the, power stations and take over the world. There's, AIs do very, very specific things and they can't really jump to the next thing. If they could do that, that's when I would be a little bit scared. But in terms of day-to-day, isn't it great? I mean, I'm trying all these little products that are coming out. I think the scary thing is that there's so many of them. Yeah. And the thing that I would focus on rather than being afraid of AI is that there's a lot of security issues within a lot of these products because they haven't been around for very long. And there's a lot of cracks between the different products that people use. And I think we need to really focus on whether data is being lost or people's identities being stolen or just, impersonation, etc. So I think security is really my big issue that I would worry about these days rather than AI.
And what about specifically within talent and executive hiring? Where can you see the optimization and gains from AI in 2025?
Yeah,
in the
I
next
think
sort of 12 months.
There's a lot of debate there and a lot of testing and a lot of trialing. I think there's a lot that AI can do, and there's a lot that isn't useful, and everybody's trying different things. And I think it means that recruiters will all be even more varied because some will be very automated. So even in the good old-fashioned days, 2 decades ago at Google, people were using word searches to find CVs because that's how search works ordinarily. But then we would find applicants would write all the keywords on their CV, sometimes in white on white paper, so you couldn't see it, but the computers would see it. And people will always game these systems, So I think a lot of that is good if you're actually looking for very high numbers of people. If you're going to be looking at a lot of CVs, it does sort of bring the numbers down. But I think within recruitment, people are very nuanced and you do need to meet them. And you do need to talk to them. And so some of the ways of filtering the best candidates can only be done to a certain degree. Then you need to be able to see whether people are going to get on and be able to work together. So I think, again, the blend of both is useful. And the degree of automation or high touch is really going to mean that there are different ways to recruit, different outcomes and more variance in terms of, I suppose, what's right for each role and what companies want to do. If you're working for an AI company, you might want to go completely with AI because that's the way your company works. Whereas if you're looking for, a nursery school teacher, you don't want to interview them on an AI. You need to know how they interact. So there's room for all of us.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because we run an executive kind of search workshop. So we get lots of people around the table that are maybe looking for their next executive role, but maybe haven't looked for a number of years and just want to understand what the market is like and how it operates now. And I think the most common misconception that we hear every single time is that you don't even review the CVs, my CV anyway, it doesn't get looked at, it's just AI and I'm either filtered in or out. And I think we have to kind of constantly remind people that that absolutely isn't the case.
Yes.
Maybe, like you say, it is at a lower level sometimes, but certainly an executive level, I think that's not how we operate, is it? We're looking at consistency, trajectory, all the things that we're looking for beyond that. I don't know if that's the same as how you feel as well.
Absolutely. People would always ask us that, even at Google, and there were thousands of applications every day. It was, quite a task, but someone looked at every CV. We had bins, which is how they called them back in the day, and we had, for every role, there was a bin of candidates and we would go through them. So either the recruiter would do it or we ended up having, as things scaled, we had resume reviewers, mostly for EMEA based in Dublin, and they would go through CVs and you would have meetings with them and talk to them about what was relevant. It's sometimes better to have AI because it's consistent, but it's nicer to have people because they can really delve into CVs and actually work out how to read between the lines. AIs don't tend to read between the lines. So, I think there's so many different ways to do it, but not one's right.
No. And even people's LinkedIn profiles aren't necessarily an accurate reflection of their skill set because it's just titles. So if you're mapping a market, you're outreaching people, you're headhunting, you still can't necessarily understand the full picture until you've met with them and things like that.
It's just a shop window, really. Yeah, and then you need to dig into things a little bit deeper when you meet up with them. But yes, I have seen a few companies that now interview with bots and things like that. I think it's it has its uses. I think if there's a lot of people, or for instance, if you're looking for someone with very technical skills, a machine can check whether you have those skills or not. But it's additive rather than instead of.
Yeah. Maybe on sort of leadership, what were the big differences that you saw in between sort of big tech and private equity in your time?
Yeah, so leadership was very different. I think having been at EA, I got used to Californian ways of thinking and doing things, and helped to translate that culture into the UK. And that was one of the reasons I was hired into Google, because they wanted people that could translate things across. So even from Google, within Google, from California to the UK is interesting and different. I remember having the first presenter coming across, and this was back in EA, someone who I won't mention, but came from Pixar, and the first thing he said to the crowded room of English people was, "Can I have a whoop?" and tumbleweed, very different. So yeah, there's different cultures. So that translation piece again, then when I moved into a more traditional environment, was again different, not better, not worse, just different ways of working. I think the biggest differences would be that in tech, you're wanting to fail fast. You're wanting to take a chance and see if it works, but do it quickly, and then learn from your mistakes and talk about your mistakes so that someone else doesn't do it. I think in a more traditional environment where you're FCA approved and you're basically making sure that everything is exacting, because the numbers are so big, and it's much more serious and much more focused on making sure you don't make the mistakes. So a very different way of approaching things. I think in any partner-led business where, in professional services, everybody wants to make partner, I think there's that keenness to get to the top. And there wasn't, I suppose, in smaller companies as much clarity. We had frameworks upon frameworks and, a lot of data to tell us what we needed to be doing next. And in traditional environments, it's less like that. So I like to be able to bring a bit more data-driven decision-making across to what is a risk-averse environment, to be able to say, hey, this is how to, make these decisions, and let's get some numbers to put behind the detail that we're looking at. So just making that, I suppose, bringing a bit more of the modern culture across, but very slowly and gently. Also looking at, I suppose, bringing more women into the business and bringing more diversity and inclusion. That was definitely something that we put as an objective, and definitely something that we were gradually managing to achieve in the more traditional environment.
What's and on that point, in your view, what's the best way, the right way of doing that? Because I think that's theme has ebbed and flowed in recent years. It was very big, and then obviously you have a different government in the US that might have taken a slightly different angle on things, and we've got Europe here. What in 2025? What's important?
Yeah, well, I think there's always swinging one direction and then another, and people don't want to change completely, and nor should they need to. I think we really need to be focusing on fairness. It's not a sum-zero game. So if you have openings that will balance the pool of candidates to make sure that there's as many people from minority groups as not, then that's not saying, oh, we're going to hold back the majority. It means that you can make decisions more equally and have more inputs at the table. So I suppose within companies that you're building, if you have, I suppose, a boardroom and everybody is thinking along the same lines, you can make some really fast decisions because everybody agrees. And it's really easy and you can go super fast. And that's really attractive, particularly when investors are involved, because they want to see these decisions being made snappy and fast, and let's go and let's get to the end of the hold period. But those decisions might not be as well thought through. If they can be interrogated by people that think differently, that should really be happening at the top table. And if you bring one woman or one person from a minority group into the boardroom, quite often the focus is on that person to be the diversity candidate. So rather than that, we really looked at challenging the chair the chairman or the chairwoman to ensure that diversity was coming from everyone, rather than the focus to be put on the one person that might have been brought from a different background. It should be a shared responsibility, but there should also be people brought in from different areas. If the chairman or chairwoman can really press people to have different ideas and have that inclusion, it works better than trying to ensure that you're looking at the person that's been brought in for a diversity reason. If you're talking to them and asking for a different opinion, they can be ostracised. Or they might decide to homogenise themselves and make them exactly the same as the rest of the board. So either way, that's not going to work. So we need to be inclusive of people from different backgrounds, but we don't put pressure on them to be the different thinker. That needs to be done by everyone. So really just looking at leadership, whether you're the CEO, whether you're the chairperson, it needs to come from that top down to actually challenge people to think more deeply, more broadly, to look at fairness, but also to look at broadening the lens of inputs that are happening when you're driving a company. So it's a hard thing to do.
Are you a big believer in tools that help you understand that cognitive diversity landscape? I know we use Hogan internally, externally with clients as well.
Yes.
Is that something that you've used extensively and really trust as part of that cognitive diversity piece?
Absolutely. Psychometric testing is really interesting just because I love understanding people. I'm not sure if one or the other is better. I think it's always good to use something so you can have questions, and it's a tool, it's not the answer. It's never going to tell you whether to hire someone or whether not to, but it can give you some examples of what questions to use in the interview process. My hardest problem, I always think, is when do you do that? Because if you do the psychometric testing at the start, a lot of CEOs or CFOs or top table people don't want to spend 2 or 3 hours doing a really in-depth Hogan test and sitting then getting the feedback when perhaps they've done it before and, actually they're busy people, especially if they're in a process where there might be, 10 other people. Quite often it's left to the end of the process then, so, the final 2 or 3 might be psychometrically tested. By that stage, you've probably found out a lot of it anyway, and it's a little late to sort of dig into those questions. So I'm always interested to know which way to go. What I find work best for me is actually just to go with a more lightweight psychometric test so that you can find the questions, but you haven't gone into depth, and then going in depth in the questioning and the interviews further down the line. But it's a great tool to be able to pull things out that you might not originally have thought of when you're meeting with people, and it's more on the surface. So it's a great tool.
Did you also do things like looking at the existing makeup of the current board, for example, and then going, we're really this way, like you say, we're very groupthink in this area, so actually we need to think about a hiring strategy to bring this type of personality in? Did it go to that level of strategy as well?
So I did a little of that with startups when I was looking at the people that were starting up from Google. Quite often the CEO was the CTO because they'd started the company, they were the coder, and if you're coding, you're not always going to be a visionary, and sometimes those skills need to be parsed. When I was at Mayfair, we had a wonderful lady in Germany who was an organisational psychologist, and she could go into the portfolio companies and really work out what the target operating model should be. Particularly when you're going in, you're investing, there's going to be a very quick move towards maybe internationalising or hitting new markets or turning a company into subscription focus. There's so many different ways that companies can adapt and change and grow. But yes, you need to look where the gaps are and really sort out what's taken the company to 200 people might not be the same as what's going to take it to 1,000. And, if you're going to hit the Americas, maybe you need a CRO in New York to understand that market. So those decisions definitely needed to be carefully thought through. And then we could interview for those candidates. But having the clarity of what's required, I really would say that you need to focus on the data of what is needed at that point. And if you can do it at pre-deal stage, even better, because you understand, what's under the covers. But again, companies that are being bought, they don't want to do that for everyone. They're not going to open the covers until they're really bought, and it's a little harder once you're fully invested and you're in there. But it's the sooner that you can do it, the more effective you can be.
Brilliant. You're working across both VC and private equity companies. What are the differences that you've seen, and what can they potentially learn from each other?
Right. So I think private equity have been quite quick off the mark, at least some of them, and indeed Mayfair have, in looking at, I suppose, the value creation model. 10 years ago, I think everybody was just looking at financial modelling and putting in debt and waiting for the markets to bring everything up, and then you could sell in 5 years, maybe even 3 years if you've got a good market, and get your money back 3 times, 5 times, whatever. The financial modelling was really what ruled. In these more choppy waters, when you don't really know what's going to happen next, it's been harder to do that, and so I suppose most of the investors have actually looked at how they can help the companies to grow internally, rather than just financing them. Actually go in and look at various horizontal and vertical areas where there can be change, there can be pattern recognition from the investors, because they've looked at perhaps 100 different tech companies that have gone through the same process. Then they'll know that we need to digitize at this stage, or they'll know we need to look at the go-to-market strategy, or we need to really look at the supply chains at this stage, and then lend their expertise and their professionalism rather than just money. So that has happened in private equity. I think VCs have done a little bit of this, but to a lesser amount. So I think that's going to be coming more and more to the fore, where they're actually going to jump in and really help. I think companies like Atomico are already doing that. Some of the bigger value venture capital companies, and that's something that's really, I suppose, interesting to me, because you're actually going to go in and talk to the people and understand where things can be improved in many more areas rather than just the finance. So that's really interesting. But in terms of the size of the companies, venture is just always interesting, because it's an adventure. It's it's a change mechanism. They haven't made the money yet, so they don't know what they're doing. It's all, I suppose, more. You can see I'm more excited about that side of things. I love when they're trying new ideas, and sometimes it's going to work and sometimes it's not. Once they've got their product and it's making money, that's when I suppose private equity are coming in and just really trying to hone it and internationalize it. So it's a lot sort of longer of a deal. The hold periods have extended a lot because of the markets at the moment, and so it's a longer play. And I think the main thing that we're looking at that stage is, how do you keep people? How do you incentivize people to stay? You're working very hard when you're in a private equity invested company. How do you keep people's energy up for a longer period of time? It's going to take a certain type of individual to do that. Or do we actually look at how to incentivize people for shorter periods and not expect them to stay for the whole hold period? It's something that I think a lot of private equity firms are grappling with at the moment. It's not something that venture have really had to deal with.
Yeah.
What can you do outside of financial?
I think the difficult conversations should always be happening early. So talking to people about this in the interview process and making sure it's clear what sort of heavy lifting needs to be done and how long the whole period might go. That should be talked about right from the get-go. In terms of incentivizing, it shouldn't all just be about, once we sell, that's where you make your money. There could be certain key points in the growth that can be incentivized to keep people sort of going to a more near-term incentive. So there's a lot of different mechanisms, but just being clear from the outset, I think that's the main thing.
I was just sort of having a thought on that, and I think maybe the challenge is more with the sub-leadership level, no skin in the game, not going to be part of the exit, but they're still being driven really hard by private equity, whereas maybe in a PLC environment, softer, fluffier, maybe a share save scheme. It's very different culturally as well. And I think there seems to be this quite a stark difference, particularly as maybe more PLCs get taken over by private equity, big cultural shifts as well. And I think managing that is really, really tricky.
Yes, absolutely. It's and it is something I think should be talked about a bit more. I think there's a lot of companies, or a lot of individuals, I suppose, that I've seen that have come through the private equity experience, and a few that have burnt out very quickly. Quite often, their response was, it wasn't what I was told it would be, and it isn't going to be what you're told it was going to be. They should hold their hands up at the start and say, right, we don't know what this is going to be. It could be, it could be very, very different to what you expect, and we need to be able to hire people that can deal with that sort of ambiguity and change, and I think that's something that needs to be interviewed for more effectively right from the get-go, because it's not just a job in the same way as, I suppose, putting it on a job spec and then you go through it and that's it. It really is a challenge, and you need to find people that are up for that challenge and want to discover where their strengths are and how fast they can go. It really is an upward challenge. I suppose.
Yeah,
it's probably.
What's the and where do you see? Because testing for that sort of, is this person good with ambiguity? Are they resilient? Some people are good at interviewing, and they can talk you through some great scenarios of that from their past. And then over, I guess there's a lot of referencing. Back channel referencing is obviously well known about. Actually, is this person what they say they were?
Right.
How did they deal with that situation? How do you see the blend of those two things? How important a part is referencing versus interviewing?
Yeah, so I suppose we didn't do so much referencing at Google. I think it was seen as the pressure was put on the interviews instead. There's definitely a place for referencing, but I suppose you'll get a different reference whoever you speak to. And it's, it can be seen as, let's put some gossip into the interview process. And that's, that can muddy the waters. But having said that, if they've done the job exactly the same before, you can find out where their pluses and minuses are. I don't think it should be a reason to hire someone or not to hire someone. I think references like psychometric testing give you a steer in terms of what to focus on in the interview. Yeah. Interviews are not 100% accurate, but they're the best thing we have. I think the focus at the start of the interview on what is required within the job, and the scorecarding that out so you can actually interview everybody on the same specific metrics is incredibly important. Then also looking at what archetypes of people you would want, and referencing can help with that. And then looking at the psychometric results, being able to pick those all out and do that at the start, that allows you to have a really strong and simple framework for what you want to ask every candidate, what you need to find, and then you can grade each of them on 4 or 5 different interviews and make that process of interviewing extremely solid, because you have so much information at the start from having a scorecard, psychometrics, and then also any sort of references. So you know what you're looking for when you meet with them, and you make the most effective use of your time when you're face-to-face with them.
Do you think on that note that private equity often revert to saying, want someone that's done a previous exit? Do you almost think that's the easy option then? Do you think it should be more about those other aspects that you've just kind of run through in terms of whether we make this decision or not?
It's a balance. I think there's definitely a lot of focus on knowing someone and trusting them, and knowing that they know how to work with the private equity firm. That is a big part of being able to work on a private equity invested deal. If you're CFO, you might have been reporting quarterly, and suddenly you have to report every 2 weeks. And there will be a very fast move towards getting things ship-shape and bigger, and it's a fast pace. And knowing that someone's done that before is very comforting. And knowing that you know how to communicate with them and that they're not going to let you down. If you've seen someone do that before, that's going to be tremendously appealing. Having said that, the ones that haven't gone to plan have oftentimes been when they know someone and they bring them in because they know them. And I think the biases can really come to the fore when you know someone, you like someone, then you kind of think they probably can do all the stuff. You need to interview for all the stuff, and you need to decide right at the beginning of the process, what is the stuff that is non-negotiable? What 4 or 5 areas do you absolutely need within this specific company, within this specific role? And those need to be measured and seen in a matrix or a spreadsheet so that you could actually look at who can do the role. There's also then definitely a need for folks at the top to be able to work together. So I know we've always said, it's all about cultural add rather than cultural fit. But I think at the top table there needs to be fit. There needs to be, they need to be additive to each other. They need to be able to work together, and that's extremely important. So interview for the candidates' skills, for what they need, for what they would be doing, so that you know that they can do the role, and then land on 2 or 3 candidates that can do the job effectively, and then let the hiring manager see who they are and who he likes or who she likes. At that stage, they can fall in like with them, rather than them falling in like with somebody who then doesn't match with what's needed within the role. So just getting those things done at the start of the process, definitely much better.
It's interesting that, isn't it? A lot of clients end up, one candidate goes through to that final stage, or we think this is the person, rather than what you're saying, which is actually let's try and make sure there's 3 really strong candidates meeting that final stage for the chemistry fit.
Yes.
Probably quite a common mistake, I would say, in a hiring process.
Yeah, and I think that quite often happens if the person, the hiring manager or the CEO that's going to be interviewing the CFO or whatever, if they meet the person too early, or if they meet all the candidates too early in the stages, they can sort of pick, I'll probably like that one, and then it steers it, and that person happens to then be the person at the end, and then they're met for the final round. If you can parse the decision maker from the process for as long as possible, at Google, the hiring committees made the decision, and the hiring manager quite often wasn't involved at all. And it was really about whether the person could do the job rather than whether everybody liked each other. That needed to be looked at, whether the person was googly and could work within a team was separate to whether you liked them or I liked them, because they wanted people that could then move to various teams. So I don't think that's always the right way for every company. I think the person that you're going to be working with does need to meet up and make sure that they're going to be able to function together, etc. But getting the data first of all, so finding out as much as you can and getting the hiring manager and anyone that wants to be involved right at the start to make that scorecard, to make the job spec, and to really set what they need for this specific role, and then trust your recruiters. Yeah. If you're really clear with your recruiters about what's needed, they'll find the right people who can do that, rather than people that, maybe have done it before. But the key skills are really what you want them to be out there looking for.
And again, going back to, obviously it's been, the tenure of CFOs in mid-market PE companies is notoriously short at the moment. Yeah. And again, just the common mistakes that are made are no scorecard agreed up front, no process defined up front. Yes. What are any other key mistakes that are leading to this high turnover? Or?
I think a lot of hiring managers will say, keep the CVs coming, I'll know it when I see it. And they just want someone like them. And the best candidates tend to have been found in the first batch. And if you're still looking, thinking, I'm not sure, I've only met one that I kind of like, you'll lose that person because of time. The biggest killer for a recruitment process is time. A particular bugbear of mine is, when recruitment firms take their time because it's very serious and they're being paid a lot of money, so they have to go slowly and it takes weeks and weeks and weeks. A great recruitment campaign, and I would pay more for this, is a very fast, tight, well executed, this is what we need to do, and managing expectations of clients as well, and just saying, right, we're going to take 2 weeks in the market, then we're going to come back with our top 10 candidates or our top 20, we'll bring it down to 10, and then, and actually if you need to, in that 2 weeks, work out if you're going the right direction, then contact your client. But drop those lines and go fast to the market. If you're a great recruiter, you should know who the candidates are. When I am approached about AI people, I've got 6 in my head before the person's finished the sentence. You know, you should know your market. And if that's a great recruiter, then you can move fast and you can get it done. But putting that work at the start, and you know, if everybody wants to interview, if you want 10 people, you know, 10 people say they want to interview the candidates, get them to input at the start first. That's the main point. And if they're not inputting at the start, they're not that interested in getting the right hire. And then work out a short and efficient process. Google did focus on too many interviews at the start. We all did. Every startup, everybody wants to meet every candidate. So we had, I think it took 17 people for me. I met 17 people before I was hired. And in the old days, that was a kind of badge of honour. Oh, look how many people it took to speak to me, or how many interviews did you have to have? They needed to scale, like every company that's growing when it's tech. And Larry always wanted to see everybody's details, and he did for a very, very long time. He really took ownership over that. It was, you know, key to get the right people into the business. But 17 is way too much, and people's time was just being taken up interviewing and not actually building the company. So they looked at the rule of 8, and then it was the rule of 5, which kind of I think is the rule of 4 now, where you have, you know, a phone interview with the recruiter. But if you're right for the role, and if the company knows exactly what they're looking for, then 4 interviews is, from a data-driven appreciation, it's the ultimate or optimal number of interviews. If you have too many interviews, everyone has a chit-chat, and that falls then into biases. You go in and it's, what are the words? Oh, tell me about yourself. And then you find out that you went to the same school as them, or, you know, and the biases are all coming to the fore. If you are going into an interview and you know you have to get 3 pieces of information, and that's what you need to put in your feedback, then that's what you'll go in and get. And if that is well organised, then the candidate will feel that they've had an efficient process, everything has been covered, they'll know what to expect, they should be told what to expect before they go in, and you've not wasted too much time having chit-chats about, you know, whatever church fairs you've gone to, or what school you went to, or, you know, all the lovely parts where you can find out about people, but do that at the end, you know. So find out specifically about what's specifically needed in the role. Be professional. And having that data is a great way to de-risk the process as well, you know. I'm perplexed that a lot of larger investment houses don't do this more rigorously, because it really is the most effective, the most optimized, the most efficient, and the safest way to make sure that you're getting the right people, and you've got rigor in the process, and you've got reasons and rationales to say this is why we hired the people we did.
Did you do things like segregating the feedback, so that if you interview someone, you say, yeah, progress them, but no more feedback, it's just they're through to the next step, rather than that kind of allowing feedback to sort of creep through the process as well?
Yeah, do you mean so that the person that's got the decision doesn't kind of impact the people further down the line?
I mean, even when we're hiring now, Neil and I have stopped giving feedback. It's simply, I meet someone for an hour, yeah, I like them, Neil, not even that, just, think they're worth you seeing. Yes. And then he'll take on and have an hour with them, and then we come back and discuss feedback, rather than, you know, that feedback being drip fed, as I just did there by mistake, saying, I really like them, Neil, you should meet them. Just stopping that completely.
That should definitely not be in the process. And you do see that a lot, where, you know, the most, or the hiring manager or the most senior person will meet someone and then say, right, I want you all to meet him because I think he's great. Yeah.
But that happens in a lot of companies even now, doesn't it? It's really
every day. Must
really
be
it always has. Yeah, absolutely. So I think if you find a candidate that meets this very strict criteria, you should interview them, and you don't need to say, oh, maybe we should progress or not. You should actually just do the 4 interviews and run it through, because the first person might be a hard interview because they didn't really know what they're talking about, and they felt more comfortable in the second, third, and fourth. So if you think that they meet that criteria, then give them the full 4 interviews, but don't sully the waters by talking in between them. It really can impact the way that people are interviewed and the way that feedback is given. If you've got these 4 interviews and you know exactly what you're asking, then you'll have terse feedback. There'll be, you know, not too much to read, etc., and it's just more fair and equitable.
Any other kind of tips like that you should say in terms of process, and just making sure that the process is professional, equitable, etc., that you have implemented, or you've seen more mature companies implement that actually other organisations could really benefit from?
Yeah, certainly. There's, I suppose, there's a lot of AI tools that will help you to ensure that you're attracting everybody for each role. So it will degenderize different job specs, etc. And it's quite interesting when you sort of see the feedback that, if you say challenging, that might be too much of a masculine word, and it'll suggest what you should use instead. And it really sort of turns things on its head. I mean, there's the data that I think everybody knows now, that women don't tend to apply for a role unless they've met 100% of the criteria. And, men will approach it very differently and think, well, of course I could probably do it, And, that's two different ways of thinking. And we need to make sure that we're not just trying to get women into male roles and homogenizing women and trying to help them become more male, but you're actually looking at having different roles for different people that suit people in different ways. So, making sure that you have a blend of everybody coming through and bringing their skills with them rather than trying to be, all the same. So, yeah, that's one that's very, very useful. I think in terms of getting candidates in, it is very key to make sure that you give them as much information about what they're going to be interviewed for as possible. And that may seem kind of counterintuitive. You're kind of giving them all the information that you want them to feed back in interview. But if you think about it, in your work life, you're not told to do a presentation and not told anything about it before you do it. So you want to make sure that the interview process is exactly the same as how they would be in their actual day-to-day working environment. You're not going to surprise them with anything. You want to say, right, we're going to talk about X, Y, and Z, and we'd love you to prepare, and then come through. And so we need them to prepare what they're actually looking at and what they're going to be spoken to about. I mean, that's only fair.
Is there no time then for a real time scenario case study in the world of AI prepped? Lovely looking presentations, everything's been done nicely, and here you go, and homogenous, all looking the same, great presentation. For actually, just if you want to see, how do you react under pressure? How do you, how does your mind work?
Yes.
Creative thinking on the spot in an interview scenario. Do you think there's any space for that?
Yeah,
as well?
Absolutely. But tell them that you're going to be doing that.
Fine.
So, they're not going to be bringing their answers with them and giving them to you. You can say, right, we're going to talk about airplanes tomorrow, and then they'll know what they'll have read up about airplanes. Yeah. We're not expecting everybody to have all the information about everything before they come to an interview. Actually, on airplanes, that's what really made me feel that this was a strong point. A friend of mine was moving as a pilot from one airline to another airline, and he was given literally a file this thick about what he needed to know, and he had to revise it. And I thought, well, of course they do. I mean, they need to know the stuff, but it might be different. So, giving people that information is a lot more fair and a better way to judge what someone's going to be like in their day-to-day job. Making interviews as much like the day job is key. You're not trying to test interviewing skills. You're trying to test what they're going to be like in the job. And if it's ever possible, it's always good to see people for a longer period of time, because they'll fall into being themselves more. If people can spend a day with a team, that quite often works well, because you can see whether they're actually going to be able to do the job.
That's interesting, because you sort of, maybe 4 or 5 stages was ultimately what you landed on as optimal at Google. Is there an optimal length of time for an interview? For
each one, well, it was always 45 minutes.
45.
And I don't know whether they analysed that. I'm sure they did. It was very data-driven in every case. I think if it's an hour, then people sort of get a little bit bored or moving on if it's not, if a candidate isn't right, you don't want to talk to them for an hour. But I think half an hour is too short. I think people do a lot more sort of quick fire early rounds. But once someone's invested and they've done the preparation, you need to spend a bit of time with them as well. So I think that always tended to work. And then you've got 15 minutes to write your notes up or make sure they're right. But if you have a lot of interviews, nobody ever reads your notes again. No. So there's no point in writing reams and reams of notes. I do like when it's just yes and no questions that you can actually, as an interviewer, answer or just even text to make sure that you've got very terse feedback. It kind of forces people to be a bit more polarized in their thought process as well. But yeah, it's good to really push people to make a decision in the moment, because you forget and get very confused about candidates, even though you think you won't. If you've seen 4 candidates in a week, you'll get them mixed up if you don't do the feedback immediately. So the more simple it can be made, the more effective it tends to be, and more can be read into it, because people will actually be able to see where the strengths and weaknesses were, rather than reading reams and reams of interview feedback.
I was just thinking about 4 stages as well, or 4 or 5 stages, and maybe the reason that's important is because everyone has a bad day or a bad interview, right? And so if you just rely on 1 or 2, at times you're going to maybe miss out on a great candidate just because you didn't spend enough time with them, even though they were a fantastic person.
Yes, and it is going to happen. I certainly saw it happen where people weren't in their, you'd spoken to them on the phone and then you met them and they weren't, a very different person. We're all human. Interviewing isn't perfect, and if you can spread it out a bit, then that can work. But again, that's why you should have 4 and not just have 1 and then chuck them out. I always thought that was a bit unfair. In terms of interviews as well, another area that I thought was interesting was we had quite prescribed questions, and there's a lot of debate about whether that's the right thing to do or not. It can feel a bit stilted if everybody's asked the same questions, and then Google at least had a lot of courses around Europe, at least, that were focused on how to nail the Google interview, and a lot of the questions we had would appear in these books and or courses, and so there was a lot of banned questions because they were, people were learning how to answer them. So actually, what we tended to do was to provide some questions for interviewers. Now, especially senior interviewers, they don't want to be told what to ask. No. So we just left them there as a, hey, you can have them if you don't know what to ask, or if you're, they're just there. You can actually make up your own questions if you want to, that's no problem. And of course, everybody before an interview, they think they've left some time to prepare. But people don't tend to prepare for interviews as much as they'd like to. So they would then think, oh, we've got some questions here. Of course people have written me questions, I'm important. And they would stick to the script. So it was actually, you didn't have to force it. They would fall back on it quite easily. And, we usually had, 6 questions and they'd need to ask 3 of them. But it really gave them a bit of a prop, and it meant that every candidate did get the same sort of questions. So you could judge them one from another much more effectively. And I do think it is interesting to have more data-driven decision-making in that way. Having said that, I've had some debates with colleagues recently about, the processes when you have very data-driven interviews. You don't remember the candidates, and perhaps they don't enjoy the process quite so much. So, it's like with DEI, things swing one way and then the other. I think there's definitely room for having a chat, and so long as you have a few data points you can look at, definitely make sure that you see the human, the full person as well.
We definitely forget this as people that are in the space, and interviewed tens of thousands of hours of probably of our lives just interviewing candidates, and you kind of build up that muscle memory for what's good and how to interview. But actually we don't always think about the fact that our clients, or in your case senior leaders that you've worked with, probably aren't very good, sometimes aren't very comfortable, and actually just having that support, advice, or training, coaching as to how to really identify top talent, it's actually really important, and probably doesn't happen enough.
Absolutely. And that was definitely something that you'd find, particularly within the engineering area of Google. That's not what they're trained to do or want to do. Some of the salespeople would be much more gregarious and like talking to strangers, and were able to sell the company, etc. And so there was a lot of training to make sure that our interviewers felt comfortable doing it as well, because the responsibility for interviewing was on everyone. There were very few people who were allowed to not interview. And all the stats were there, and we even had the stats for how people's accuracy was, in terms of they gave a grade that was good and people hired the candidate, etc. So there was graphs, that everything was data. It was quite interesting if you wanted to really dive into it. But I think because they really concentrated on getting it right, engineers tended to be very good interviewers. Very methodical, very specific, and would actually really dive into what was needed, and keep the interviews on track. And that was definitely something that I enjoyed working with them. They were great to do. In terms of having the interviews, we did quite often have to make sure that they weren't pressurizing candidates too fast. it was quite often a challenge. Hey, well, I know Fibonacci, why don't they? And why couldn't they spit it out in 2 seconds? And there were certain things that they'd really pressurise candidates for, so we had to kind of pull back on that and say, well, actually it should be about finding what's interesting in this candidate that you perhaps don't have in your team already. So go in and search, first of all. It's not a competition. You're not trying to be better than them. And I know our focus was trying to find people that were better than you. That was always the one of the mantras. But going in at the start and actually finding something really interesting about someone, it's a really nice lead in. It makes people feel at ease and makes people feel that they've been able to contribute positively at the start. And in terms of the gender divide, there did tend to be much more focus from male interviewers on, competing, and then a lot of the female engineering candidates might get tripped up because they might approach things slightly differently, and that sort of testosterone-driven challenge was slightly harder. So we wanted to make sure we were keeping everybody in the loop, and that we could make sure that everyone was given a fair chance to feel confident in the interview and give their best result.
What about candidate experience? Because it seems, we've been in a time where it's been, a bumpy market, a lot of people coming out of big corporates through rounds of cost-cutting redundancies, lots of applications for lots of jobs, and you still hear that candidate experience is poor, don't get any interview feedback. If you do get interview feedback, it's the culture fit wasn't right, and that's it, and you're kind of like, oh, you spent all that time. What do you think about that in 25?
Absolutely. I think you need to really set out your stall in terms of expectations from the start. I keep coming back to having that difficult conversation early. Even with people you don't know, candidates need to know what to expect at every stage. And Google was quite good at that, having it on the website. This is what we're looking for, this is what we're going to do, and this is what you'll get back. And being very open and honest. People are able to display themselves to their utmost if they know what you're looking for. We didn't want to miss people or miss skills within people because they didn't know we were looking for it. So just being very transparent is really key. But also saying, hey, look, we've got so many applications, it's really hard to give everybody feedback at the same time in the same way. When I was at Google, we had GDPR come in, and being able to know in the process that we would have to give candidates their feedback if they asked for it. That was, I suppose, a big changing moment in terms of what was captured and what was not, and it really needed to be less chit-chatty and less lots of notes that on thoughts and things that came into your head when you were interviewing. It needed to be really focused on can they do the job, and that really needed to happen a lot more quickly. There needs to be an expectations management of candidates from the start as well, to say, look, we're going to be looking for this, and it might not be because you're not able to get through the interview. It might be that the salary is wrong. It might be so many different things, and just being able to make sure that they know that we are doing the same thing. We're trying to find the right role for them, and we want to have them get through. If you never put somebody into an interview process when you don't want them to win, you don't want them to get the job, you want to help them to do their best in the interview and give it their best shot. So supporting them through that, and knowing that the recruiter's on your side and not gatekeeping and being against you, I think that's a real skill for recruiters. And giving a little bit of feedback. You don't have to give a lot, but actually picking up the phone. I love that, and that really doesn't happen quite enough. I think there's a lot of automated, we thought you were fabulous, but that's it's difficult to hear. And I think the more you can just pick up the phone and say, hey, this was great, but this is what we think you should focus on for the next time, so that you can actually help them to improve their process, particularly at the higher levels. They've put in a lot of work usually in preparation for the interview. So
maybe a final thought, but doesn't sound like you think us as recruiters or people leaders are going to be disrupted significantly by AI, but have you got any sort of thoughts for the future as to maybe what we can expect in talent acquisition, in people leadership, with the emergence of AI? What are you hopeful? What do you think's to come?
It's funny you should ask that. When I was interviewed for Google, and that was back in 2005, I think, they asked the question about how I saw the future of recruitment, and I said, well, I think everyone's going to be on Google, and you'll just find people on Google, and everyone will put themselves as a CV on Google, and that's what LinkedIn is. Actually, everybody does say, hey, here I am. I think it's a great way for candidates to be able to control them, what's seen externally, and then you don't own, a company doesn't own their data. I think there's going to be a lot of cross-geography recruiting and a lot of movement that way. I opened offices across EMEA because we needed to find different skill sets, and you can't always find everyone that's next door or can come to your office. So I think there's going to be an increase in that as well. Things are swinging backwards and forwards, though. There's a lot more sort of nationalist feeling in various countries, not just America. So I think there's a few sort of closed doors there, but I think tech will always be able to breach those barriers anyway. I think a combination of blockchain and AI is going to be really interesting to see a lot more. The transactions. So transactions will be able to happen more seamlessly across geographies. In terms of the way that recruiting goes and has changed over the last, I suppose, 5 years, there's been a lot more remote interviewing, and I really love that AI can give you feedback and just basically give you your notes when you've had a VC interview. And it's one reason why I'm preferring to do VC interviews than face-to-face interviews, just because it's so incredibly useful to get that feedback. Maybe I should be looking at how you can do that even when you're face-to-face. I think I feel less comfortable.
You can do it with the phone, but
do you mind if I record this?
It feels a bit
right.
like old-school journalism.
Exactly.
I had the same problem the other day, actually. I didn't know what to do in person.
So maybe... I know, we're
start
all
scribbling
awkward.
again.
Yeah, exactly.
Can't read my writing anymore.
I think it is better, though, because you're actually able to give someone your full attention and eye contact because you're not scribbling.
Agreed.
Absolutely.
So if you've got an AI product that can actually sit between the interviewer and interviewee and not sort of change how people are reacting.
For the fact that if you're meeting 20, 30, 40 people in a week and you're kind of going, I can't remember that. What was the number that they said, or what country are they moving to, or what was that fact? And then it's not 100% perfect yet, but it's better than I am.
Oh, much better. I mean, I can't read my handwriting half the time. So actually using AI to enhance what we always did, I think it's going to really continue to do that. There's going to be strides. I don't think AIs are going to be effective at doing the interviewing.
No.
I think it's fun, and it might be fun for a couple of roles.
I did see something online the other day for a full AI person recruiting.
I applied for a job just because it was like that, just to see what it was like.
Did you?
And it was hilarious. I mean, I didn't know whether it could actually tell from my features how I was feeling or whether I was about to answer something. And there's a lot of uncanny valley kind of not feeling quite comfortable. It has a long way to go. And I think if you knew someone was an AI, even if they were completely natural, there's something, maybe it's because we didn't grow up with it. Maybe our children will be happy with it.
Yeah. I think for us that's been huge in terms of, you talked about having a fast and a quick process. The amount of time now that we can spend more time with candidates, speak to more candidates, map markets faster.
Yes.
We can train the LLM to format the data in a way that suits us. It automatically uploads it into our CRM. So we're not having to kind of backtrack and update systems and fields. We can spend more time doing the value add.
Exactly.
It's absolutely huge. It's been the
12-week
game changer.
Shortlisting thing should be...
We're going to go dark and what are you actually doing? You should know your candidate pool, and you should be able to actually send out.
And we can show you every week, this is what's happened.
Yeah.
So.
No, I think it's definitely going to be better. I think the future's bright for recruitment.
Brilliant. Well, on that note, thank you very much, Jenny.
No problem. Thanks you for your chat.
Cheers.